Only one. Only one what? One player? One button? One weapon? This was the theme of the 2019 Game Maker's Toolkit Game Jam. Game Maker's Toolkit is a popular YouTube channel that analyses game design by looking at popular video games, run by former games journalist Mark Brown. He runs an annual game jam that started 2 years ago, which makes this year its third run. I didn't participate in the previous GMTK Game Jams, but since the past game jams have not only had thought-provoking themes, they've also gathered an audience. 2018's GMTK Game Jam received 1,058 submissions, more than most individual game jams get. The 2019 Game Jam blew this out of the water with a huge 2,770 submissions. Not only is this more than double the previous year, but it also beats the world's largest online game jam Ludum Dare's most recent event by 240. And even then, that game jam is split into 2 categories, so to say I had competition was to put it lightly. Nevertheless, I completed the jam and came out with a game that I am very happy with, and has potential to take further. So hey guys, and welcome to MashUp Games. This is the making of PlantPocalyps for the 2019 GMTK Jam. The game jam was starting on the 2nd of August at 8 PM British time. It was running for 48 hours through to the 4th of August at the same time. Assuming I would sleep for 8 hours every night, that would leave me with 32 hours of development time. Take off a couple more hours each day for breaks and food, that leaves me with about 28 hours of actual development time. That is not a lot of time to make a game, let alone make one by yourself, but I saw it as a challenge. Day 1. As soon as I found out the theme, only one, I started brainstorming. One what? What could be only one? I made a list of what could be limited to only one in the context of games. I also made a list of game genres and themes to jog memories of existing type of games that I could rethink somehow. And I couldn't settle on an idea. There were things I could work with, but I wanted to push myself. I didn't want to make a simple game where you only had one bullet or one button, because I feel like that would be something that most people would do, and I want to do something really unique. I sent my girlfriend a text asking if she had any ideas, and she came back with something apocalyptic. And that had me thinking, what makes something apocalyptic? Zombies are post-apocalyptic, and what do you think of when you hear the word apocalypse? You think of a vast, barren wasteland devoid of nature and grass and plants. And then I thought, what if you had the last ever plant in existence? What if there was only one plant left on the planet, and you had to protect it from zombies? This idea wasn't bad, but it wasn't groundbreaking. Sure, the only one theme is in the story and the plot of the game, but I wanted it to play into a core mechanic. So, what could you incorporate in the gameplay that heeds to only one? So I considered what the gameplay would be. You would fight off zombies, and you would tend to the plant, keeping it watered and safe. These are 2 very contrasting mechanics, which makes you constantly switch between offense and defense. And so my first thought was to have the plant on you and just shoot your gun. But then I thought, what if you had to choose between shooting zombies and tending to the plant? Now how could I do this? Well, what if you had to drop the gun in order to move the plant? And then I wrote down one line. You can only hold one item. You can either pick up the gun and shoot zombies, or you can pick up the plant and move it to the watering area. By limiting the player to only being able to hold one item, it forces a player to switch between tending to the plant and shooting off zombies, constantly switching between that offense and defense, like I said before. And so now, I had a theme, I had a concept, and I had mechanics. So I got to work. The first thing I did was create an empty scene, with a single player character and a couple items. I then scripted the main mechanic for picking up items, which seemed to work quite nicely. At the time, the player and items were simply represented as coloured squares, as I wanted to make sure the mechanic worked nicely before I put in the effort to make sprites, just in case that the mechanics don't play out well in practice and I need to rethink my idea. Good thing it did work out well, because then I was able to add some camera movement and the ability for a player to swap items. With that done, I went to sleep. Day 2. I woke up at 8 the next day, now 12 hours into the game jam. The first thing I did was add a zombie into the game, and that will follow the player around the scene. At this point, the zombie would only follow the player and not target the plant, though that changes later. After that, it was time to actually add some art. So I hopped into Photoshop and drew out a simple player character, as well as a potted plant, and imported them into the game. With game jams, I try to keep the art style simple so that it doesn't take a lot of time. With submissions by a team of people, you have assigned programmers, artists, designers, sound designers, and other roles. But when you're entering as an individual, it means you have to wear all the hats. so you have to find ways to get things done quicker where you can without taking shortcuts. My way of doing this is to do simple art that is still stylized. If you see my other Game Jam projects, you can tell that the art is simple, but it doesn't look bad or rushed, and still has a style and charm to it. The next thing I did was add in a weapon, the ability to aim the gun towards the mouse, as well as some plant UI. To describe this, I should probably talk about how the plant works. The plant has a health bar, shown by the green, but the plant also has a hydration bar, shown by the blue. The plant, if left untended, will slowly start to get thirsty. When the plant gets dehydrated, or in other words when the blue bar runs out, then the plant starts to lose health. To keep the plant hydrated, the player must take the plant to the pond, where the blue bar will start to rise again. If the plant has taken damage in this time, then once the plant is fully hydrated, it will start to heal itself. However, if the plant is left in the pond for too long, then it will start to drown. The reasoning behind this is that if the plant just had a health bar, then the player could simply hold onto the gun and keep the plant safe by never picking it up, which defeats the purpose of the only one mechanic. And if the plant wasn't capable of drowning, the same mechanic would be made pointless, for the player could just place the plant in the pond and keep it hydrated at all times. Following a new sprite for the zombie, I made it possible for the zombie to, when close enough to the player or the plant, attack it and deal damage. For this to be possible, I also added a player health bar. Before, the zombie was only able to follow the player, but now its AI is a little more complex. The zombie will search the scene for the player, and the plant. It will then tell the difference between itself and the two objects. If the distance between the zombie and the plant is shorter than the distance between the zombie and the player, then the zombie will target the plant instead of the player. It's still a bit primitive, but it puts the plant in more danger and forces the player to be more careful about where they leave the plant, and how far away they can get away from it. At this point, I managed to also implement the pond and the plant's rehydration mechanic. Working on the weapon, I added a sprite for it, and wrote a script for its shooting mechanic that will deal damage to the zombie whenever a bullet hits. At the beginning of the jam, I made a simple camera follow script that followed the player exactly. However, I didn't want the player to feel locked in, and I wanted them to be able to feel like they could look in a certain direction. So I changed the camera so that it would get the world position of the mouse and have the camera target the midpoint between that and the player to a maximum distance. Something I implemented in the game but didn't include in the end version was a health pack. If a player was low on health, they could search the scene to find a health pack to heal themselves. But in the end, I didn't find this necessary. If the player could heal themselves, then it lets them be more careless about where they're positioning themselves. They could use themselves as bait and launch themselves towards the zombies, as they didn't need to be so cautious with their health. However, if I took away the health kits, then the player has to be more careful when moving about. It makes it a lot more challenging. For example, if the player leaves a gun on the spot that zombies are now over, the player just can't run through the zombies to get the gun, but find a way to get around them to preserve their health. The last thing I did for this day was some particle effects. I've never really used the particle system before, and so I had a lot of learning to do here. I managed to create a particle effect for dust being kicked up when the player moves about the level. I also added some particle effects for when the plant is healing, and when it is hurting. This allows the player to be more alert and have more of a visual warning for when the plant is close to dying. While I was at it, I also added a sprite for the bullet, and then went to sleep for the day. Day 3. 36 hours in, 12 hours left. Most of my game was there, I just had to add a bit more and then add some polish. So I started with implementing the plant drowning mechanic, as well as the game over screen. When the game over screen is shown, it will show the player why they got the game over, which will be one of 3 options. The plant died, the plant drowned, or the player died. I added some UI which shows the player what day they're on and how many enemies are left to defeat for that day. A little touch of polishing that people like to add is a camera shake whenever the player does a certain action. So I made a camera shake method that will shake the camera whenever player is firing a weapon, just to add a bit of impact to shooting. Now the game would be no fun if there was only one type of enemy. Sure, it might be hard to begin with, but once the player knows how to deal with the one zombie, then the game becomes very easy and not very much fun. So I added different types of zombies to make gameplay a bit more interesting. The second type of zombie is the bigger zombie. A slightly bigger and wider zombie that moves slower but deals more damage and has more health. The third type of zombie is the small zombie, a small version of the original that moves much faster and has small health and attack power. And the fourth and final type of zombie is the huge zombie, a very large zombie that would move at a very slow pace, but its health is much larger and it deals a ton more damage. Along with the new zombies, I also added a particle effect for when they die, so they don't just disappear. Now where a lot of game jams tend to skimp out on, in a lot of cases, is on the sound. But since audio is so easy to add in Unity, and they add a lot of life to the game, I decided to make a lot of sound effects. However, I only realise now none of my recordings of the game at the time had audio, so instead enjoy these sound effects, as well as a reenacting of me making the sound effects with objects around the house.
Ooh. Ooh.
With 3 hours left, I decided to resize the scene. With only the pond being a key point of the scene, there was a lot of empty space that the player will likely never go to, so I resized the scene to be a lot smaller. I also planned out the days so that the player goes through 12 days, each with a specific number of each type of zombie that spawns on each day. The game was pretty much finished, with one small problem. When the player starts the game, it jumps them straight into the day. As so, when you open up the game, you instantly start on day 1 without any warning. So I added a start scene that would display a bit of text, and give the player a play button to press that will then put the player into day 1. Also, when the player gets game over, I had a retry and exit button. With a logo also made for the game, I had 30 minutes to submit it. I had planned to leave this much time, but then I ran into a problem. When I made the build, I didn't actually test the retry button. So when I tested it, it kind of broke the game. Luckily I managed to fix it, but then it left me with only 10 minutes left. That was fine, but then I started uploading the game. 10 minutes later, the deadline passed, and my game had not uploaded. Luckily for me though, I wasn't the only one having this problem. With so many people submitting games, we had essentially crashed itch.io. The people running the game jam realised this, so pushed back the deadline, and I managed to finally get my game submitted 1 hour and 30 minutes after the initial deadline. And so there you have it. I am really proud with this game and how it came out. An issue I kept running into in the past with game jams is making games that look and sound good but don't necessarily play well. However, I myself found this game very fun to play. It didn't get tiring but kept me on edge the whole time, though I think it's down to the game having very little downtime in the gameplay. Now there were a couple issues with the game. For example, sometimes when you hit the retry, the day does not display from day 1 and displays day 0 for some reason. And probably the biggest bug is that sometimes the player is not able to pick up the weapon. Now me revisiting it the next day, I was able to fix this bug, but unfortunately I cannot change my game jam entry. I feel like this game is very capable of being so much more. It has potential to be a full game. So should I make this into a full game? Let me know in the comments. But that does it for this video. If you want to join my Discord server and talk with me about this game or my other projects like Project Dungeon, then the link is down below. And if you want more game jam content and don't want to wait for a few months, then it's lucky for you that many game dev YouTubers, including Blackthorn Prod, Danny, Jabrils, Saiku, and Brackies, whose community has hosted 2 game jams I've been a part of before, will be hosting a community game jam on itch.io at the end of this month that I hope to be entering. So I will have a video on whatever game I make for that coming out sometime next month. But if you've liked this video, then give it a like. And if you want to know more about my channel and its future content, then please subscribe. This is MashUp Games, signing out.